Hi everyone! On this channel we explore the most mysterious and frightening stories that make us question what we know about our world. Today I will tell you a story that for decades kept the greatest researchers of the planet in suspense and made the very conqueror of Everest set out on one of the most dangerous expeditions of his life. Imagine the highest mountains in the world, where the air is so thin that every breath comes with difficulty, temperatures in which a person can freeze in a matter of minutes. And somewhere in this icy hell, among impossible gorges and snow-covered peaks, hides a creature that has inspired fear among local inhabitants for centuries. What if I told you that in the mid-20th century, the greatest minds of the planet, from Nobel laureates to Everest heroes, seriously hunted the snowman? The government spent huge amounts of money searching for a creature that many considered a myth, and that some of these people found evidence that made them forever change their views on what is possible in this world. The story you're about to hear will show you how thin the line is between reality and legend. It is a tale of how the search of the mythical creature turned into a real hunt, where the stakes were not only scientific reputation, but at times life itself. It all began in 1951 when the legendary British mountaineer Eric Shipton took a photograph that shocked the entire world. During a reconnaissance expedition to Everest, at an altitude of 5,800 meters on the Menlong Glacier, he discovered a trail of footprints in the snow. But these were not ordinary prints. The footprints were enormous, 33 centimeters long and 20 wide. The shape of the foot was human, but the size exceeded all possibilities. For scale, Shipton placed his ice axe next to the print. When the photograph was developed and published, it had the effect of a bombshell. The picture made rounds in the newspapers across the world and introduced Western civilization for the first time to the creature that local Himalayan inhabitants called the Yeti, or the disgusting snowman. But for Tibetans, this was nothing new. For centuries they had told the stories about a wild, hairy creature that lives in the most inaccessible parts of the mountains. According to their description, the Yeti was over 2 meters tall, covered in dark brown fur, with a low forehead, deep-set eyes, and a powerful jaw. It walked on 2 legs, swinging its long arms wide, and gave off such a foul stench that it could be smelled from a great distance. But the scariest thing in the local stories was something else. They claimed that the Yeti kidnapped people, men and women from mountain villages, and took them into unreachable caves high in the mountains. According to legend, the bones of victims were kept in those caves. None of the abducted ever returned home. Imagine the horror of a mountain villager who late in the night hears heavy footsteps outside the wall of his house, snoring and the scraping of claws on stone, and in the morning discovers that someone walked around his dwelling at night, leaving gigantic tracks in the snow. Shipton's photograph ended up in the hands of the man who had already become a living legend, Sir Edmund Hillary, the first person to conquer Everest. But what began as mere curiosity soon turned into a true obsession. Hillary was a man used to achieving the impossible. In 1953, he did what seemed unthinkable. He reached the highest peak on Earth, together with the Sherpa Tenzing Norgay. Now a new challenge stood before him: to find a creature that had avoided contact with the humans for centuries. At the 1960, at the highest of his global fame, Hillary announced the preparation of a unique expedition under the code name Silver Heart. Officially, it had 2 goals: to search for the Yeti and to study the effect of prolonged high-altitude exposure on the human body. But everyone understood the real goal was the hunt for the snowman. The expedition included people whose names resounded in the scientific world: Marilyn Perkins, director of the famous Lincoln Park Zoo; Dr. Larry Swan, a self-proclaimed Himalayan man; American space physiologist Dr. Tom Nevison; glaciologist Barry Bishop, an expert in glaciers and high-altitude geography. It was a serious expedition supported by the World Book Encyclopedia, with a budget of over $1 million, a massive sum for the time. Most importantly, none of the participants doubted that they might actually encounter a Yeti. Back then, that didn't seem crazy. After all, just a few years earlier, the mountain gorilla had been discovered, a species scientists had not even suspected existed. On September 10, 1960, the expedition set out for the Royal Whaling Valley, a place Sherpas believed to be one of the Yeti's most densely populated regions in the Himalayas. It was a territory where civilization ended and a world began where completely different laws of nature prevailed. The valley lay at an altitude of 4,000 meters above sea level, surrounded by peaks covered in eternal ice, some reaching over 7,000 meters. They were so thin that every movement took immense effort. Even in September, daytime temperatures rarely rose above zero, and at night they dropped to minus 20 degrees. The first strange things began to happen just a few days after their arrival in the valley. The local Sherpa guides, people who had spent their entire lives in the mountains and feared neither snow leopards, nor avalanches, nor cliffs, grew increasingly uneasy. They refused to stray far from the base camp after sunset, and constantly looked over their shoulders, as if sensing some invisible presence. Hillary later recalled, "Our guides were acting very strangely. These were people who had lived in the mountains all their lives, knew every trail, every danger, but here they were clearly afraid of something. They whispered among themselves in their own language and kept glancing up toward the high ridges." Then came discoveries that made even skeptics start to reconsider. First, new footprints, even more impressive and detailed than the ones Shipton had photographed. The prints were fresh, left no more than a day before they were found. The expedition's experts studied them carefully and concluded that they were made by a bipedal creature, weighing at least 200 kilograms. In rock crevices, members of the expedition found tufts of coarse, dark hair that didn't belong to any known animal in the region. Laboratory analysis later showed that the hair didn't match any species of bears or other mammal native to the Himalayas. In the cave at 5,200 meters, reachable only with climbing equipment, the expedition team discovered something terrifying. The cave was filled with bones, a mix of remains from various animals, yaks, mountain goats, wild sheep, birds, but the way the bones were arranged made it clear that they hadn't been left by natural predators. The bones were carefully staked in a certain order, as if someone had deliberately created a kind of food storage. What's more, many of them were broken in a specific way to extract the bone marrow, which requires a certain level of skill. Dr. Larry Swan, who examined the find, was stunned. What we saw in the cave didn't fit any framework of modern zoology. Animals don't behave like this. Only an intelligent creature could have created such a stash. At an altitude of 5,800 meters, they discovered what the locals called a Yeti nest. It was a shallow cave, the floor covered with roughly woven branches and tufts of dark fur. In the center of the nest was a large pile of bones, among which the researchers, to their horror, found fragments that might have belonged to a human. Now, imagine the feeling of people who had climbed to such a heights, where it's hard to breathe, where they'd crossed dangerous ice crevices and cliffs, suddenly standing face to face with evidence that some creature capable of dragging a person to such a place was living nearby. The atmosphere in the camp grew more and more tense. Even the Western members of the expedition began to feel like they were under constant watch by unseen eyes. The real terror began after dark. The first to experience something strange was Barry Bishop, who woke in the middle of the night to a bizarre sound. Heavy raspy breathing coming from right outside the thin wall of his tent. When Bishop finally gathered the courage to peek outside, he saw nothing but snow-covered slopes bathed in moonlight. But the air was thick with a sharp, unpleasant odor, a mix of musk, wet dog, and something rotten. In the morning, they found the same huge Yeti footprints all around his tent. The creature had come right up to the camp, and judging by the tracks, stood there quite some time, watching the sleeping people. "That was the creepiest feeling of my life," Bishop later recalled, knowing that something big, wild, and unknown stood just inches away from you while you slept, totally defenseless. 3 days later, something happened that nearly shut down the entire expedition. One of the Sherpa porters, a young man named Pemba, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. In the evening, he'd gone to a mountain stream to fetch water and never came back. The search began immediately, but in the dark and rugged terrain, it was nearly hopeless. Only in the morning were they able to trace his path in the snow. Pemba's footprints clearly led from the camp to the stream, but then they suddenly ended in the edge of the deep ravine, and right next to the human traces were the same giant Yeti prints. It looked like there had been a struggle, and then something incredibly strong had dragged the man toward the edge. And Hillary now faced a painful choice: to continue the expedition and risk the lives of remaining team members, or to retreat, leaving the Yeti mystery unsolved. But the conqueror of Everest wasn't one to back down from the challenge. The decision was made to split up. The main group would stay in the valley and continue monitoring, while Hillary himself, along with 2 volunteers, set off for the ancient Tibetan monastery of Komjung, where, according to rumors, sacred Yeti relics had been preserved for centuries. The path to the monastery lay through one of the most dangerous Himalayan passes, at an altitude of 5,400 meters. On the second day of the journey, as the group climbed a sleepy icy slope, something happened that could have ended not just the expedition, but the life of the great mountaineer himself. Hillary fell into an ice crevice. When he was pulled back to the surface, he was in a state of shock. What he described from his time inside the frozen pit made even seasoned climbers question his mental state. Down there, in the icy cave I fell into, I saw eyes. Huge glowing eyes in the bluish darkness of the ice. And they were looking straight at me, studying me. The creature could have easily killed me. I was completely hopeless. But for some reason, it didn't. It looked at me as if it was just observing an uninvited guest. Upon reaching the ancient Komjung monastery, Hillary encountered a new obstacle. The Buddhist monks were extremely reluctant to show sacred relics to foreigners. To the Tibetan lamas, the Yeti scalp wasn't just a museum artifact. It was a holy object, a part of their spiritual beliefs. It took long negotiations and significant donations before the abbot finally agreed to show the sacred items to the Western researchers. What Hillary saw in the monastery's dark treasury exceeded all his expectations. The scalp of the Yeti looked like a pointed cap, conical in shape, made of dark, extremely coarse hair. The mummified Yeti hand was truly impressive. Nearly twice the size of human hand, with long fingers ending in powerful black claws. Through a translator, the old Lama told the ancient story of their origin. These sacred objects belonged to a creature our distant ancestors were forced to kill many generations ago. It happened during a terrible winter, when the Yeti came down from the high mountains and began abducting people from our village. First 3 children disappeared, then 2 women. Brave hunters found its lair, a cave full of human bones. The battle with the monster lasted all night. Many brave men died, but in the end, the creature was slain. Hillary managed to convince the monk to let him take the scalp for scientific analysis in Western laboratories. This was an unprecedented event. For the first time in many centuries, the sacred relic would leave the monastery walls. Upon returning to civilization, Hillary immediately sent the mysterious scalp to the best laboratories. The results were deeply disappointing for all Yeti enthusiasts. Careful examination revealed that the famous Yeti scalp had been skillfully made from the hide of the Himalayan mountain god, the serum. Centuries of preservation and expert craftsmanship by local artisans had turned an ordinary animal skill into a mysterious relic. The mummified hand also turned out to be a fake, though a very ancient one. It belonged to a human, but had been carefully modified to create the impression of the hand from an unknown species. By the end of the long, costly expedition, Hillary was forced to draw a bitter conclusion. In his official report, he wrote, "After thorough analysis of all the available evidence, I've come to the inevitable conclusion that the Yeti does not exist as a separate biological species. All the stories about the abominable snowman are based on misinterpretations of tracks from known animal and the vivid imagination of the local people. But not everyone was convinced by this categorical statement. Dr. Desmond Doig, Hillary's colleague on the expedition, revised his views years later. I think we were too quick to make final conclusion. After all, even the mountain gorilla wasn't officially discovered until the 20th century. A lack of convincing evidence does not necessarily mean proof of total absence." If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And see you soon.